John was a simple man who lived on the edge of a quiet rural town. His house was small, made of old wood, and stood alone at the end of a dusty road. People in town called him the man who keeps to himself. He worked as a mechanic during the day, fixing old farm trucks, and spent his evenings in the workshop behind his house. The workshop was full of old tools, screws, broken radios, and a single rocking chair where he often sat alone. John didn't have a wife or children. He didn't throw parties or go out much. His life was quiet, predictable, and peaceful. He liked it that way, or at least he thought he did. But sometimes late at night, when the wind blew against the wooden walls, he would feel a small emptiness in his chest. He had no one waiting for him when he came home. No voice calling his name. No laughter. Just silence. One night the wind howled louder than usual. The sky was dark, heavy with clouds. A storm was coming. John was sitting in his workshop wiping grease off his hands when he heard something strange. It wasn't the usual sound of wind or rain. It was sharper, like a soft, short cry. He froze for a moment, unsure if it was real. Then it came again, a faint sound almost like a child's whimper. John grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The cold wind hit his face immediately and raindrops began to fall. He walked around the back of the barn following the sound. It was faint but clear now. Something was behind the stack of wooden crates. When he reached it, he froze. Lying in the mud was a small figure, wrapped in something silver that shimmered even in the weak light. It looked like a child, but not completely human. Its skin had a pale glow, its eyes were large and shining softly like starlight. Tiny fingers clutched the blanket tightly. The child trembled, not from rain alone, but from fear. John's first reaction was to step back. His heart raced. He had seen strange things on television, but never in real life. But as he stared at the small figure, something inside him shifted. The child wasn't a monster. It was just a child. Shivering. Alone. Without thinking too long, he took off his coat, wrapped the child carefully, and lifted it gently into his arms. The little one was light, like holding a fragile bird. Its big eyes blinked at him once before it buried its face against his chest. For a moment, John felt its heartbeat against his own. That small sound was enough to silence every doubt in his mind. He ran back to his house, shielding the child from the rain. Inside, he quickly placed the little one on the couch near the fire. The child stared at the flames, its eyes reflecting the light like tiny moons. John placed a warm blanket over it and tried to talk slowly. "Hey there, it's okay," he said softly. He didn't know if it understood English, but his voice was calm. "You're safe now." The child didn't speak. It only made a small chirping sound, like a bird learning to sing. John watched carefully. The child didn't seem aggressive or wild, just lost. The storm grew stronger outside. The wind pushed against the house. John knew he couldn't just call the authorities and expect kindness. He had lived long enough to know how people reacted to things they didn't understand. In town, even small differences were enough to create fear. An alien child would not be treated gently. He made a pot of warm soup. The child watched him with wide eyes, curious about everything. When John placed the bowl near it, the child sniffed it first, then carefully dipped its fingers in and tasted it. Its eyes brightened slightly, and it let out a small happy sound that made John smile for the first time in a long while. After the child ate, it curled up on the couch. John sat on the chair nearby, watching the small chest rise and fall with each soft breath. He didn't understand why this strange child had appeared at his home. But something told him it wasn't an accident. He had spent years living quietly, pushing the world away. But now the world had come to his door, wrapped in a silver blanket with shining eyes and a small heartbeat. As the night grew colder, John placed another log in the fireplace. He carefully draped another blanket over the child. He noticed how the little one reached out in its sleep and grabbed the edge of his sleeve, like a child holding on to safety. His chest felt heavy in a way he couldn't explain. Not a bad heavy, a warm heavy. In the morning, the rain stopped. A soft mist covered the ground. The child opened its eyes slowly, blinking against the light. John sat quietly with a mug of coffee, unsure how to begin this new day. "Good morning," he said softly. The child tilted its head, then mimicked the sound awkwardly. "Goo, morn." John almost dropped his mug. It could repeat. Maybe it could learn. That tiny attempt was enough to melt something deep inside him. He placed the mug down, smiled gently, and repeated the word slowly again. "Good morning, Goo, "Morn," the child said, this time a little clearer. For a man who had lived so long in silence, the sound of that small voice felt like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. It wasn't just noise, it was connection. And connection was something John hadn't felt in years. As the day went on, he tried to understand more. The child didn't speak much, but it followed him everywhere. When he fixed a broken truck, it sat nearby, watching with curiosity. When he walked through the field, it touched the grass with wonder, like it had never seen anything like it before. Everything was new to the little one, and watching that wonder made John see his quiet world in a new way too. By evening, the news had reached the edge of town. Someone had spotted strange lights in the sky the night before. People were talking. Some were scared. Some were excited. But no one knew that the small child who had fallen from the sky was now sleeping peacefully in the house at the end of the dusty road. John didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe officials would come. Maybe people would question him. But in that moment, as he watched the small figure wrapped in a blanket sleeping against the warm fire, one thing was clear. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was the child. He didn't plan this. He didn't ask for it. But some things don't need planning. Some things simply arrive quietly, softly, and change everything. For years, John had lived in silence. That night, the silence ended. The next few days felt different for John. For the first time in many years, his house wasn't silent. Every morning when he woke up, the little alien child whom he had quietly started calling Lena was already awake, sitting by the window and looking at the sky with big, curious eyes. She didn't understand everything around her, but she was learning fast. The first morning, John boiled some eggs and made toast like he always did. He placed a plate in front of her carefully. She tilted her head at it, unsure what to do. John picked up his own toast and took a bite, chewing slowly to show her. Lena copied him, taking a tiny bite like a small bird testing its first meal. When the crunch of toast filled the air, she made a small chirping sound of surprise, then smiled shyly. It was such a simple moment, but it made John's chest feel warm. Lena followed him everywhere. When he went to his workshop, she sat on a little wooden box near the door. She would watch every move he made, tightening bolts, fixing engines, wiping his hands with a cloth. Sometimes she pointed at the tools and made soft sounds as if trying to name them. John started teaching her a few easy words. "Wrench," he said, holding the tool in the air. "Wench," she repeated softly. He laughed gently, not at her, but with a kind of joy he hadn't felt in years. "Close enough," he whispered. Every day, Lena learned something new. She learned how to say water, light, tree, and even John. The first time she said his name, it was quiet and slow, Joan, but it felt like music to his ears. At night, she liked to sit outside wrapped in a thick blanket. She would stare at the stars, her large glowing eyes reflecting the sky. John often joined her, sitting beside her in silence. She would slowly raise her small hand toward the stars as if trying to talk to them, but no one answered. When the cold breeze touched her face, she would lean gently against John's shoulder. He didn't move away. Instead, he placed his hand carefully on her back, letting her know she was safe. In town, people had begun whispering. They didn't know exactly what had happened that stormy night, but they knew something unusual had reached John's house. He noticed it in the way some neighbors stared a little too long when he went to the store. The man at the counter asked strange questions like, "Everything okay out there, John? And you got someone staying with you now?" John didn't answer much. He had learned long ago that some things were easier to protect in silence. Lena was still a secret, though it was only a matter of time before someone came asking questions. Meanwhile, inside the house, something beautiful was growing. Lena wasn't just learning words. She was learning to trust. At first, she was easily frightened by sudden sounds like a door closing too fast or a truck engine starting outside. When that happened, she would curl up in a corner and cover her ears. John never yelled. He never forced her to stop being scared. Instead, he knelt beside her quietly and placed his hand gently on the floor near her. Sometimes she didn't respond right away, but slowly, carefully, she would reach out her small glowing hand and place it on his. She learned that his presence meant safety. John was learning too. He had lived alone for so long that caring for someone else felt both strange and beautiful. He learned to cook warm meals instead of eating cold canned food. He learned to keep the house warmer at night because Lena didn't like the chill. He even placed a soft night lamp in her room because darkness scared her. Every night before bed, Lena liked to hum softly. It wasn't a song from Earth. It was something else, something that seemed to float in the air like a soft light. John didn't understand the words, but they made the house feel calm. They made his heart feel alive. One day, John took Lena to the field behind his house. The sun was bright and the grass was soft beneath their feet. Lena had never walked barefoot before. She took careful steps at first, unsure of the feeling. Then she looked down at her feet and let out a tiny laugh. The sound of her laughter surprised even her. It was light and sweet. John laughed too, not because of anything funny, but because joy was contagious. He showed her how to pick wildflowers. She watched him closely, then copied him, plucking a yellow flower with delicate fingers. She held it up to the sunlight and stared at it like it was the most magical thing she had ever seen. For her, maybe it was. They spent the afternoon walking, exploring, and laughing softly. At one point, Lena ran a little ahead, her silver-gray hair catching the sunlight, making her look like a tiny star running across the field. John watched her and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Lena began calling him Papa sometimes in a shy, uncertain voice. The first time she said it, John froze. No one had ever called him that before. He felt a lump in his throat and couldn't say anything for a moment. All he did was place his hand gently on her head and whisper, "You're safe here." One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lena picked up a small stick and began drawing on the floor. John leaned closer and saw what she was making. She drew something that looked like stars and a small shape like a spaceship. Then she drew a smaller figure standing next to a bigger one. She pointed at the smaller one and said softly, "Lena." Then she pointed at the bigger figure and said, "Papa." John's eyes softened. He didn't need to understand alien languages to feel the meaning behind that drawing. She was telling him she saw him as family, but not everything was easy. A few days later, a black car drove slowly down the dusty road. It didn't belong to anyone from the town. John saw it from his window and felt a chill run down his spine. He had known this moment would come. Someone somewhere was looking for Lena. Two people stepped out of the car, a man and a woman dressed in clean black coats. They looked serious, like people who had seen too much. They walked to his front porch and knocked on the door. Lena was in the kitchen playing with a wooden spoon, humming softly. She didn't notice. John opened the door carefully. The woman spoke first. "Good evening. We're from the agency. We're here about the child." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. John's heart pounded, but he stayed calm. "She's safe," he said simply. The woman looked at him closely. She wasn't unkind. There was something soft in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. "Can we see her?" John hesitated. He turned slightly. Behind him, Lena peeked out from the kitchen doorway, clutching her spoon like it was a treasure. Her glowing eyes met the woman's. For a long, silent second, the woman didn't say anything. Something in Lena's small, gentle face seemed to reach into her heart. The man cleared his throat. "We need to take her in for observation." But the woman didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the child. Something in her expression changed. A quiet softness, almost like remembering something painful and beautiful at the same time. John didn't know it then, but this woman's arrival would change everything. What started as a lonely man and a lost child was about to turn into something none of them expected. And as the night grew quiet around the small house, John felt the wind shift again, not with fear this time, but with the sense that a new chapter was beginning. The following morning, the black car returned. John noticed it from his workshop window. Lena was already awake, sitting on the small rug by the fire, drawing tiny stars with a stick. She hummed softly, a song that seemed to float in the air. The car slowed down, stopping at the edge of the driveway. Two figures stepped out. This time, only one came to the house. She introduced herself as Mara, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and soft movements. Her black coat contrasted with the warmth of the morning sun. "Hello," she said quietly. "I'm here about the child." John studied her carefully. There was something different about her. She didn't carry the cold, official attitude of a government agent. There was gentleness in the way she spoke, a softness in her voice that made him lower his guard just slightly. "Please," he said calmly. "She's safe here. She's learning, growing. She's happy." Mara looked at Lena, who peeked from behind John's legs. Her large shining eyes met Mara's gaze. For a moment it was silent. Then the woman knelt slowly, bringing herself closer to Lena's height. She extended a hand gently. "Hi, Lena," she whispered. Lena didn't move at first. She stared at the hand, then back at John. John encouraged her softly. "It's okay. She's nice." Finally, Lena stepped forward, curious but cautious. She touched Mara's hand lightly, then pulled it back, unsure. Mara smiled softly and sat down on the floor, leaving space for Lena to approach in her own time. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said gently. For the next few minutes, the room was quiet except for Lena's soft humming. John watched, realizing something remarkable. Mara wasn't just here for an official task. She had a connection to Lena that was unspoken, subtle but real. Mara began visiting more often. At first it was brief, careful visits where she brought food, clothes, or books. But slowly she started staying longer, reading small stories to Lena, sitting by the fire, and even helping John prepare meals. Lena began responding to her. She would mimic Mara's soft voice, copying words and sounds. She learned quickly. Mara would laugh softly at the little mistakes Lena made, but she never scolded her. John noticed that Lena was calmer around Mara than anyone else besides him. Her eyes sparkled when Mara spoke, and sometimes she even reached out for her hand before John could guide her. John found himself feeling something he didn't expect. He was used to quiet days, used to silence, but Mara's presence brought a warmth he hadn't realized he missed. He found small moments to watch her when Lena wasn't looking. How she carefully helped the child. How she laughed quietly when Lena made mistakes. How her eyes softened when she looked at Lena. He realized slowly that Mara was more than just a visitor. She was someone who understood, someone who had likely experienced loss or longing. He didn't need words to see it. One day, John had to leave for a short trip to the town market. Mara stayed behind with Lena. She showed Lena how to draw stars in a notebook this time, explaining each small shape softly. "These are not just stars," she said. "They are dreams too. Every dream needs a home." Lena listened, her small face tilted toward Mara, her eyes wide and shining. When John returned, he found the house brighter than ever. Lena ran to him with a small drawing in her hands. Mara was sitting quietly on the floor watching them, a soft smile on her lips. John knelt down and looked at the paper. It was a small sketch of 3 figures under a starry sky. Lena pointed at one and said, "Lena," then at the bigger one, "Papa," and finally at the third, "Mara." John's chest tightened. It was a simple sketch, but it carried a message he didn't need words to understand. The child had already accepted Mara as part of their small world. John felt something shift inside him, a mixture of hope, warmth, and perhaps even love. That night, Mara stayed late. The wind had picked up again, and rain tapped softly against the windows. Lena had fallen asleep on the couch, curled in a blanket. Mara sat in a chair nearby, quietly observing the little one. John poured himself a cup of tea and sat across from her. They didn't speak at first. Silence was comfortable. Finally, Mara spoke softly. "She's amazing," she said. "I've never met a child like her. So curious, so brave." John nodded. "She didn't have a choice, but she survived. And she's learning to trust again." Mara's eyes softened. "Trust? Yes, it's hard sometimes. For some of us, we forget how to give it." John looked at her, sensing that she was speaking of herself too. There was pain there, but also hope. He realized that Mara's gentle care wasn't only for Lena, it was for herself as well. As the night deepened, Lena shifted in her sleep and whispered softly. Mara leaned closer instinctively. John watched the interaction, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. Mara's presence was changing everything in subtle ways. She brought light to their small home, laughter to their days, and warmth to a life that had once been lonely. Finally, Mara stood and stretched. She walked toward the door, pausing for a moment. She looked at John with eyes that were both honest and hesitant. "Thank you for letting me stay today," she said softly. I like being here." John nodded, unsure what to say. He felt the same, but words weren't enough. Mara smiled gently, and with that, she stepped out into the rainy night, leaving the door slightly ajar. The faint sound of raindrops filled the silence, but it was no longer lonely. That night, as John lay in bed, he thought about Mara and Lena. He realized that life had given him something he hadn't expected, a chance to care for someone, to protect someone and perhaps to love someone in ways he hadn't known possible. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. His quiet life was no longer quiet. It was alive. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly, washing the world in a gentle rhythm. Inside, 3 hearts, John's, Lena's, and Mara's, were slowly beginning to form a family, even if the world outside didn't yet understand. The nights grew longer as winter approached, and the small house at the edge of the town was filled with warmth from the fire and the soft glow of the lamplight. Lena had settled into a quiet routine. She woke early, explored the house, drew in her little notebook, and followed John everywhere. Mara had become a regular visitor, always careful, always gentle, and increasingly part of their small world. On this particular evening, the fire crackled in the living room, throwing golden light on the wooden walls. Lena was already asleep on the couch, wrapped in her silver-gray blanket. Her small chest rose and fell slowly, and her tiny hands rested gently against her notebook, still open to a half-finished drawing of stars. John sat nearby, sipping tea quietly, feeling a soft sense of peace that had been missing from his life for so long. Mara had stayed late that night, after finishing her small tasks. She moved slowly around the room, tidying a few things, making sure Lena's blanket was snug. John watched her. He noticed how gently she moved, how softly she spoke, even to the objects in the room. There was care in everything she did. It was a type of care John had not seen in a long time, an understanding that life could be fragile and precious at the same time. Finally, Mara sat down on the floor near the fire, careful not to wake Lena. She placed her hands on her knees and looked into the flickering flames. John watched her quietly, unsure how to begin a conversation that didn't feel ordinary. After a long moment of silence, Mara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "She reminds me of someone I lost a long time ago." John turned to look at her, curious. "Someone you loved?" he asked gently. Mara nodded slowly. "Yes, my child. I had a daughter once. She didn't make it through a mission. I thought I had lost all chance to feel that kind of hope again." Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, were wet with memories she didn't voice. John said nothing. He didn't need to. He understood the weight of her words. He had never had children himself, but he had spent enough time alone to know the ache of loss, even the loss of things you never had. Mara's hand moved slightly, unconsciously reaching for Lena, who was still sleeping. She froze, realizing what she had done. I don't know why I feel this," she whispered. "It's just, she's like a small light in the darkness I thought I would never see again." John's heart softened. He didn't speak, but he leaned slightly closer. Mara's presence in the house had been gentle, but he could see now how much it mattered, not only to Lena but to her as well. The room was quiet again, except for the soft crackle of the fire. Mara leaned back, her gaze softening as she looked at Lena's small sleeping form. She lowered her voice even further, almost like she was afraid the words might vanish if spoken too loudly. "Can I stay with you too?" she whispered. John's chest tightened. He didn't respond immediately. He stared at her, at the small curve of her shoulders, at the hesitance in her eyes. The words weren't just about staying in the house. They were about wanting a place in their small, fragile family. They were about belonging, about healing, about hope. John swallowed hard. He realized that the question carried a weight of trust and vulnerability that few people ever offered. And in that quiet moment, he understood that Mara wasn't asking permission in the ordinary sense. She was asking to be part of a life that was already forming around love, care, and hope. He moved slowly closer to her. You can stay," he said softly. "If you want to. You don't have to leave. Not anymore." Mara's eyes glistened, and for a moment tears formed at the edge of her eyes. She nodded slowly, almost in disbelief, and gave a small, almost shy smile. It was a smile that carried relief, gratitude, and the first real sense of home she had felt in years. John looked toward Lena, still sleeping peacefully on the couch. He realized that in this quiet house filled with simple warmth, 2 lives had changed because one small child had arrived unexpectedly. Lena's presence had not only given John a purpose, but had also given Mara a second chance at connection. For the first time in years, John felt that his small house was truly alive. The quiet walls had become filled with trust, care and unspoken love. Mara's gentle voice, Lena's soft humming, and the crackling fire created a world that was safe, warm, and full of hope. Mara sat closer now, careful not to disturb Lena. She let herself breathe freely, feeling that for the first time in a long time, she belonged somewhere. John poured her a small cup of tea and she accepted it with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from relief. "You don't have to explain why you feel this," John said softly. "It's okay. We're all learning. Together." Mara nodded, holding the warm cup with both hands. The steam from the tea rose gently, curling in the light of the fire. She looked around the room, the small drawings Lena had made, the soft blankets, the scattered toys and tools. It was a simple home, but it was theirs now. A home where trust could grow slowly, quietly, like a small seed breaking through frozen soil. For a while, they sat together in silence. John felt a soft weight of joy in his chest, a feeling of completeness that had been missing for so long. Mara felt it too. She leaned back slightly, resting against the wall, listening to the quiet breathing of the child and the faint hum of the wind outside. It was a night that would remain in their memories forever. A night when a small question whispered in the dark changed everything. A night when a lonely man, a gentle woman, and a child from the stars began to form a family that the world outside might never fully understand, but one that they themselves would always cherish. Outside, the storm had passed. The wind was still and the night sky was clear. Stars shone brightly like small beacons of hope. Inside, the fire flickered softly and 3 hearts, John's, Mara's, and Lena's, beat quietly in the same rhythm, connected by trust, care, and a shared sense of belonging. John realized that their journey had just begun. The road ahead might not always be easy, and the world outside their small house might never fully accept what they had built. But here, in the warmth of the living room, with the soft breathing of a child and the gentle presence of a woman who had returned to hope, everything felt right. Mara's whispered words had opened a door, not just into the house, but into a new life, a new family, a new beginning. And John knew with a quiet certainty that they would face the future together, one small step at a time, bound by love, trust, and the courage to embrace something unexpected. And as Lena stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring softly, John and Mara exchanged a quiet, knowing glance. Their small world had changed forever. The first winter morning with Mara officially staying at John's small house felt different. The cold wind rattled the windows, but inside, the warmth of the fire and the hum of quiet voices created a sense of home that had been missing for years. Lena was awake early as usual, her big shining eyes following the flicker of the flames in the fireplace. She had curled her silver-gray blanket around her shoulders and carried her notebook, eager to draw before breakfast. John had already started preparing porridge. He moved around the kitchen carefully, mindful of the small table where Lena would sit and Mara, now a part of their daily life, would help set the dishes. The house smelled of warm oats, bread, and the faint aroma of the tea Mara had brewed the night before. It was a simple smell, but it filled the house with comfort. Lena hummed softly while drawing stars in her notebook. John poured the porridge into 3 small bowls and placed them on the table. "Good morning," he said softly, smiling. Lena looked up, her eyes bright with recognition. She chirped a small greeting in her own voice, and Mara laughed gently, adding, "Good morning, Lena." The 3 of them sat together, eating breakfast quietly. It was not just a meal, it was a ritual of belonging. Mara had grown used to these mornings, helping Lena hold the spoon properly, teaching her little phrases and laughing softly when the child made small mistakes. John watched, quietly amazed at how naturally she fit into the small routine they had built. After breakfast, John suggested a walk to the field behind the house. The snow had melted slightly overnight, leaving the grass damp but soft. Lena ran ahead, her small feet barely making a sound, her silver-gray hair catching the sunlight. Mara followed, holding John's hand for a moment before letting Lena explore. John watched them. There was something extraordinary about this simple scene. A man who had once lived alone, a small child from the stars, and a woman who had returned to hope and trust. Their laughter mingled with the soft rustle of the grass and the distant calls of birds, forming a melody of life that John hadn't known he needed. As the day went on, they played together. John showed Lena how to make small towers of rocks and sticks. She copied him carefully, concentrating hard, Mara encouraged her softly, praising each small success. Lena's eyes sparkled when a tower stood without falling, and she turned to show John and Mara, her small hands clapping. Mara knelt beside her, carefully holding Lena's hand to help stabilize the rocks. "You see, little star," she said softly, "we can build something together if we trust each other." Lena looked at her, then at John, and chirped happily. The words didn't matter. The feeling did. Trust, care, and love were growing stronger with each passing moment. Afterward, John took out a small worn radio from his workshop. Lena had been curious about it for days, watching him fix broken things. John showed her how to turn the dial slowly, how to listen to the static until a voice came through. Mara watched, her eyes gentle, smiling at the wonder on Lena's face. For a child who had come from somewhere unknown, the simple sounds of Earth were magical. That evening, the three of them returned to the house. Lena carried her notebook, eager to continue drawing stars. Mara helped her settle on the couch, while John prepared a small fire in the fireplace. The house was warm, the shadows dancing softly on the walls. Mara took a deep breath and looked at John. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined I could feel this way again. I didn't think I could belong anywhere." She paused, looking at Lena. "And now, I do here with both of you." John felt a lump in his throat. He had lived a life of solitude for years, never expecting anyone to share his world. But now he realized how empty it would have been without Mara and Lena. He simply nodded, understanding that some things didn't need long speeches. Some things were understood in quiet glances, in shared laughter, and in trust built slowly over time. Lena stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring softly. Mara leaned closer instinctively, resting her hand gently on the child's small shoulder. John watched them, feeling a warmth that went beyond the fire. It was the warmth of connection, of a family forming in the most unexpected way. Days turned into weeks. Mara stayed regularly now, slowly taking part in every aspect of their small home. She helped John repair tools, taught Lena small words and phrases, and sometimes simply sat quietly, listening to the hum of life around her. The three of them had developed routines: morning breakfasts, walks to the field, reading by the fire, and evenings drawing stars together. Neighbors had begun to notice subtle changes. The house seemed brighter. Sometimes from the edge of the road they could hear laughter and soft voices. But most of the town remained unaware of the extraordinary family within those wooden walls. John didn't mind. He didn't need the town's approval. What mattered was the trust, care, and happiness that had grown quietly in their home. One evening, as snow lightly fell outside, Lena ran to the window, pressing her small hands against the glass. Mara joined her, wrapping her arms around the child, and John stood nearby, smiling. Lena pointed at the snowflakes, chirping happily. Mara whispered softly, "Each one is a little star. Just for us." Lena looked at her, then at John, and chirped again, as if sharing a secret between the three of them. John realized, in that small moment, that family wasn't just about blood or origins. It was about love, care, trust, and presence. Mara had become part of their lives not because of duty or obligation, but because her heart had returned to hope. Lena had chosen them both, and in doing so had brought them together in a way neither of them had expected. As night fell, the three of them sat by the fire, the house warm and safe. Lena had fallen asleep on Mara's lap, her small body curled gently. Mara rested her hand on Lena, careful not to disturb her. John poured tea and sat nearby, watching the flickering flames. The wind blew softly outside, carrying the quiet sounds of the town to a distance. Inside, the house was filled with quiet breathing, soft hums, and the sense of belonging. John thought about the stormy night when he first found Lena. He thought about the fear, the uncertainty, and the loneliness that had filled his life. And now he realized how much richer life had become, not because the world had changed, but because he had opened his heart to it. Mara whispered softly to John, almost as if speaking to herself, "Thank you for letting me stay." John nodded, smiling gently. "We're all together now," he said, "and we'll face whatever comes. Together." For the first time in years, the house at the edge of the road was not just a building. It was home. A home where a child from the stars had found safety, where a woman had found hope, and where a man who had once been alone had discovered love in its quietest, simplest form, Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, covering the ground in white. Inside, 3 hearts beat together, connected by trust, care, and the quiet magic of family. They didn't know what the future held. Perhaps the world would never fully understand their small family. But they didn't need the world's approval. They had each other, and for John, Mara, and Lena, that was everything.